I was 79 when my daughter whispered to her husband, "He's just a burden now." She thought I couldn't hear from the living room. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from heartbreak. I raised her with love, protected her through everything, even sold my car to pay off her student loans. But now, I was an inconvenience. What they didn't know was that the man they shoved into the guest room was the same man quietly paying off their mortgage, their credit card bills, and their dreams, until one day, I stopped at I used to be the man they ran to when the world felt too big. When my children were little, their legs were still clumsy with newness, and their hearts wide open to the world, they ran into my arms like it was the safest place on earth. And for them, it was. Back then, I was younger, strong in the back, calloused in the hands, and full of dreams that stretched no further than my front porch in rural Illinois. My wife, Mary, and I had built a modest life, full of warmth, tradition, and the kind of quiet joy that you only recognize in hindsight. She passed when I was 48. Breast cancer. It came and went like a storm we didn't see coming. One day she was smiling at me in the kitchen, wiping flour off her apron, and the next I was clutching her scarf like it still held the sound of her breath. I didn't get time to grieve, not properly. Not when there were 3 children looking up at me with trembling chins and tear-stained cheeks. David was 12, Lila 10, and Abby just 6. I became both mother and father overnight. I packed lunches, braided hair, and learned to hum lullabies I had only ever heard Mary sing. At night, when they were asleep, I'd sit on the edge of my bed and whisper into the darkness, "Please help me do right by them." I worked like a man possessed. Carpentry during the day, refinishing old barns, fixing floors, sometimes building custom furniture. At night, I took a job as a security guard at the grain mill. I barely slept. Coffee and guilt kept me awake. I told myself every sore muscle was worth it if it meant Lila could have piano lessons or David could join the school's science club. I still remember the feel of Abby's tiny arms wrapped around my neck after she had a nightmare. She'd whisper, "Don't let the shadows get me, Daddy." And I'd hold her close, kiss her forehead, and tell her, "I am your light, baby girl." They depended on me for everything, and I wore that responsibility like armor. Even when the days were long and the loneliness ate at me like termites through wood, I smiled for them. I'd sit in the front yard and cheer as Lila performed her clumsy dance routines, or help David with his school projects, once building a miniature suspension bridge from popsicle sticks until 2 a.m. Abby loved painting. I kept her drawings in a tin box, each one labeled with the date and what she said it was supposed to be. They brought me joy I didn't think possible after Mary died. And in those early years, I believed our bond was forged in something deeper than blood. It was made from sacrifice, time, and love so constant it could anchor any storm. When they started growing up, I was proud. David got into community college, then a job at an insurance firm. Lila wanted to be a nurse, and Abby, oh, she had dreams of becoming an artist in Chicago. I encouraged them all, even when it meant taking out a second mortgage. They never knew that, of course. I didn't want them to feel the weight. My only request was simple: stay close to each other. Stay close to me. For a long time, they did. Sundays were sacred. David would bring over ribs from the smokehouse, Lila would bake lemon squares, and Abby would show us her newest sketches. I'd fire up the grill, and we'd sit out back laughing about old memories. There was love there. Or at least, I believed there was. I used to catch myself thinking, maybe I did it. Maybe I raised them right. It never occurred to me then that love could rust. That time and comfort might chip away at gratitude until all that remained was expectation. I didn't see the distance beginning to creep in, not at first. Because to me, they were still my babies, the ones who used to fall asleep on my chest while I rocked them through thunderstorms. I believed that the strength of my love would keep us whole. That no matter how many birthdays passed, they would always run to me, not because they needed something, but because they remembered who I was. But the truth is, people forget. Not suddenly. Slowly, in ways that feel like shadows growing longer as the sun sets. Looking back, maybe I was holding on too tightly to something that had already begun to drift. But back then, I didn't know what was coming. I didn't see the subtle unraveling of the bond I'd spent a lifetime weaving. All I saw were the faces of the children I raised, faces that still made my heart ache with love. And in my old, foolish heart, I still believed I was the father they would always run to. It started small, almost invisible, like a draft sneaking through a closed window. You don't feel it at first, not really. Just a chill in the room that wasn't there before. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just the way life goes when kids get older. But something had shifted. David stopped calling as often. He used to check in every Friday night, just to talk about work or ask how my arthritis was doing. Then it became every other Friday, then once a month. The last time he called, I picked up on the first ring. He sounded rushed, distracted, like he had 100 better things to do. I asked him about a game we used to watch together, the Cubs versus Cardinals, and he didn't even remember it had happened. Lila, well, she moved to Chicago after she got that job in the hospital. I was proud, of course I was. She'd worked hard for it. But after she left, the visits dwindled to holidays only. Even those felt like a formality. She'd bring her boyfriend, James, a good enough man, polite, and they'd stay for a couple of hours, smile through dinner, then leave right after dessert. No more staying the night. No more whispered talks on the porch swing. She started calling me Dad less and Pops more, like I'd become some distant character in a family sitcom. And Abby, my sweet baby girl. The one who used to paint our hallway walls with chalk outlines of stars and trees, who once swore she'd never live more than 5 minutes away from me. She took an internship in San Francisco and never really came back. Oh, she sent postcards. Artsy ones with little quotes on the back. "Thinking of you, Dad," scrawled in her neat handwriting. But that was it, no phone calls, no video chats. Just empty words dressed up in good intentions. At first, I made excuses for them. They're busy, I told myself. They've got lives, pressures, deadlines. I'd stare at my phone some evenings, thumb hovering over their names in my contacts, debating whether I should call. Sometimes I did, and it went straight to voicemail. Other times they'd answer, but the conversations were short. Polite. Surface level. I tried to bridge the gap. I sent care packages, little things I thought they might need. Wool socks for David during the winter, a second-hand coffee grinder for Lila because I remembered she liked fresh beans, a sketch pad for Abby with a note tucked inside, "Paint something for your old man." I never got a thank you. Not even a message. Then came the birthday card. It was from all three of them. A store-bought thing with glitter and a joke about aging. Inside, they'd all signed their names. No personal notes. No memories shared. Just names. Like they were signing a petition. I sat at the kitchen table, reading it over and over, trying to find the warmth I used to feel in their words. It wasn't there. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the handmade cards they used to give me, scribbled in crayon, full of misspelled words and pictures of stick figures holding hands. What happened? At the next family gathering, Thanksgiving at David's house, I noticed something else. The air was different. They talked around me, not to me. I sat at the table, mostly quiet, listening to conversations about Netflix shows I didn't know, restaurants I'd never been to, arguments about politics I couldn't follow. When I tried to share a memory or tell a joke, someone would glance at their phone or change the subject. I was a shadow in the room, no longer needed but too present to ignore completely. I offered to help in the kitchen, but Lila waved me off. "Just relax, Dad," she said without looking at me. So I sat on the couch, alone, while my family buzzed around me like I was some piece of furniture that didn't quite fit the new layout of their lives. Later that night, I overheard David talking to his wife in the hallway. "I think we need to figure out what to do about Dad long term," he said. "He's getting older. We can't keep having him bounce around like this." Bounce around? I had a home. I had a life. Or at least I thought I did. It hit me then, not all at once, but like a slow leak in a tire. The love I'd known was still there, maybe, but it had grown tired. Worn out by time, convenience, and a world that moved too fast for old men like me. They didn't see me as the father who built their swing sets and held their hands through heartbreaks. They saw me as something fading. A responsibility. The next morning, I left early, before anyone else woke up. I placed a thank you note on the kitchen counter and walked out into the cold morning air. The world was still quiet, not yet buzzing with indifference. I looked up at the pale sky and whispered, "Mary, I think I'm losing them." Because in that silence, for the first time, I realized they were no longer running to me. They were running away that I never told them what I gave up. I figured a father's job was to carry the heavy things so his children didn't have to feel the weight. And I carried a lot, more than they'll probably ever know. When David lost his job 5 years ago, he didn't even have to ask. He called me late one evening, his voice strained, pretending everything was fine. "Just a bump," he said. But I heard the panic behind his words, the kind of quiet desperation a father learns to recognize. I didn't let on. I listened, nodded, offered encouragement. The next morning, I walked to the bank and withdrew $8,000 from what was left of my retirement account. Paid off 2 of his credit cards and covered 3 months of his mortgage. I did it anonymously. Sent it through a cashier's check. He never questioned it, just said something like, "I guess things worked out after all." I remember hanging up the phone and sitting on the porch, hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the realization that my life savings were becoming a life raft I kept tossing to children who didn't even know I was paddling. Lila had her own crisis 2 years later. A condo she bought in the city turned out to be a financial mess, hidden repair costs, high association fees. She was drowning and called me in tears. "I don't know what to do, Dad. I'm scared." So I sold my old Ford pickup. The one I'd rebuilt with my own hands after Mary passed. It wasn't worth a fortune, just over $6,000, but it bought her time. Covered the emergency plumbing repairs, helped her renegotiate the loan. I took the bus for months afterward, bundled up with aching knees and stiff joints, smiling at strangers so I wouldn't cry about a truck I loved almost as much as the freedom it gave me. And Abby, my soft-hearted artist. When her gallery show was cancelled due to funding issues, she called me, voice cracking. "I feel like I'm failing." I didn't hesitate. I dipped into the small emergency fund I kept hidden in an envelope taped beneath my dresser drawer. $2,500. Mailed it to her wrapped in an old sketch of hers I had framed in my bedroom. "Keep creating," I wrote on a sticky note. "The world needs your light." I never asked for anything back, not gratitude, not recognition. I just wanted to protect them. To be the quiet force that steadied their world. But over time, I started to realize, they never looked back. Not once. When I'd visit David's house, I'd see the new flat-screen TV and upgraded appliances. He never mentioned how things turned around. Just tossed me a beer and talked about stocks. Lila's condo was beautiful. She gave me a quick tour the last time I visited, pointing out the new flooring and custom countertops. "I got lucky," she said. I nodded, knowing luck had very little to do with it. Abby once posted a photo on social media thanking the universe for helping her bounce back. I looked at that post for a long time, sitting in my worn-out recliner, wondering if I'd somehow become invisible, even to the people whose lives I had helped hold together. Still, I kept giving. I fixed David's fence in the middle of January, slipping twice on the ice but finishing the job because he didn't have time. I replaced a leaking faucet in Lila's kitchen when her boyfriend couldn't figure it out. My hands shook the whole time, but I didn't complain. I babysat Abby's dog for a week while she went on a retreat to find herself. I fed that little mutt every day and even took it to the vet when it coughed up something red. No one paid me. No one offered to. They said things like, "You're the best, Dad," and then they were gone again. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about being seen. Being remembered. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit at the kitchen table and write it all down, not out of resentment, but because I needed to remind myself it really happened. That I wasn't dreaming the sacrifices I'd made. That I wasn't just some old man with too much time and a fading memory. I called the file, Quiet Costs. Pages and pages of notes. Dates, amounts, events. Not because I ever intended to show them, but because I needed to know my love had weight. That it meant something. I once told Mary, back when we were young and foolish, if I ever become a father, I want to be the kind they remember long after I'm gone. And now, sitting alone in a house that used to echo with laughter and life, I wondered if they would remember me at all, or just the things I fixed and the money that always showed up just in time. They saw what I gave them. But not what it cost me. When David and his wife offered me a place to stay, I told myself it was temporary. Just until I figured things out. My house had become too much for me to manage, leaky roof, sagging floors, and winters that froze my bones. David said, "You shouldn't be alone, Dad. We've got space." And so I packed 2 suitcases, my journals, and Mary's old recipe tin, and moved into their guest room. But from the first night, I knew I wasn't home. The room they gave me was at the far end of the hallway, next to the laundry room. It had no windows, just a lamp that flickered when you turned it too quickly. The bed creaked with every breath I took, and the heater barely reached that corner of the house. There were no pictures, no curtains, just white walls and silence. It felt more like a storage closet than a space for someone they loved. Still, I tried to be grateful. I folded my clothes neatly, kept my space clean, even left my slippers outside the door so I wouldn't track anything through the house. I cooked dinner twice that first week, meatloaf and Mary's chicken stew. They said thank you, but I noticed how David's wife, Samantha, quietly pushed her plate aside, barely touched the food. Later that evening, I overheard her in the kitchen whispering into her phone, "He's sweet, but I don't know how long this can work. He's old." I pretended I didn't hear it. But my heart did. Loud and clear. They stopped asking me to join them for things. If they watched a movie, I wasn't invited. If they went out to dinner, they'd leave without a word and return hours later with leftovers they never offered me. At night, I'd sit on the edge of that cold bed and read Mary's letters, whispering her name like a prayer. One morning, I overheard something that cut deeper than any silence ever could. Samantha was talking to David again. Her voice low but sharp, slicing through the quiet like a blade. "He's just a burden now." 4 words. That's all it took. She said it like I was some old couch they couldn't wait to haul out to the curb. I sat frozen in the hallway, clutching the mug of coffee I had just made, steam rising past my face like a veil I could hide behind. David didn't argue. He just sighed. "He's my father," he said, not with love, but with obligation. Like a man forced to keep something he no longer had use for. I wanted to disappear. After that day, I spoke less. I moved quietly. I stopped trying to make conversation at breakfast. I stopped cooking. I ate toast in silence while they bustled around me like I was part of the furniture. I spent most of my time in that little room. I organized old letters, wrote in my journal, and stared at the ceiling, wondering how something as deep as love could grow so thin. I remembered the nights I used to sit beside their beds when they had fevers. The songs I hummed. The stories I told. And now, the only story left was this quiet retreat into nothingness. Once, I tried to help Samantha with the dishes after dinner. She looked surprised, then said, "Oh, that's okay," with a tight smile. The kind of smile people give to polite strangers. That's what I had become. A guest. Maybe even an intruder. I still remember the night I found David's youngest boy, my grandson, Tyler, crying in the living room. He was upset over something at school. I sat beside him, rubbed his back, and said, "You can tell me anything, buddy. I'm always here." He looked up and asked, "Are you leaving soon, Grandpa?" I froze. "Why would you ask that? Mom said this isn't your real home." It took everything in me not to cry right there. I smiled and told him I'd be around for a while. But inside, I felt something unravel. A cord that had once held me tightly to this family, fraying thread by thread. That night, I wrote in my journal until my hand ached. I listed every moment I could recall, the birthdays I planned, the scraped knees I bandaged, the nights I stayed up with a sick child while Mary whispered prayers beside me. I needed to remind myself that I had mattered. That I wasn't always this excess. Sometimes I prayed. Not for them to love me more, but for the strength to keep loving them, even as they forgot who I truly was. I had become a shadow in the home I once lit with laughter. No one yelled at me. No one was cruel. That would have been easier, somehow. But what I felt was worse than anger. It was absence. A hollow space where love used to live. I was no longer their father in the way that mattered. I was something else. A ghost that walked too slowly, talked too little, and took up space they didn't know what to do with. I used to believe that love remembered. That even if the world moved fast, love would wait for you to catch up. But in that house, I was already gone. Have you ever felt like a guest in your own family? Share your story in the comments. It happened on a Wednesday morning, sometime around 7 a.m. I was standing in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to whistle, when my knees gave out. No warning. One moment I was watching the steam rise, and the next, I was on the cold tile floor, my breath trapped somewhere between my chest and my throat. The pain wasn't sharp, it was more like a heavy blanket suddenly thrown over my body, smothering everything. I couldn't move. My right hand knocked over the sugar jar on the way down. I remember the sound of it shattering against the tile, pieces scattering around me like tiny alarms that no one heard. No one came. For what felt like an hour, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to shout for help, but all that came out was a hoarse whisper. Eventually, I heard footsteps. Samantha. She stepped into the kitchen, phone in one hand, mascara wand in the other. She gasped, but not in concern. More like surprise. "What happened?" she asked flatly, kneeling beside me. "I think I blacked out," I managed. She didn't touch me. Just stood up, paced a few steps, then muttered, "God, we can't afford a hospital bill right now." That's what she said. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Let me call David." Just money. Bills. Burden. Still, she helped me sit up and called an ambulance, more out of obligation than urgency. I watched her from the floor, tapping her foot as she spoke to the dispatcher, like she was late for something far more important than the old man lying at her feet. At the hospital, they ran tests. The doctor, a young man with kind eyes, told me it was a combination of exhaustion, malnutrition, and low blood pressure. He asked if I'd been eating regularly. I nodded yes, but the truth was, I hadn't had a real meal in weeks. Toast, tea, sometimes a banana. That's all. I didn't want to ask for more. Didn't want to take up space. I stayed for 2 nights. Not a single visit from David. Not even a phone call. On the second night, a nurse named Claudia sat by my bed during her break. She was around Abby's age. She asked me if I had any family nearby. I told her yes, but I didn't feel like I did. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You remind me of my grandfather. He used to tuck $5 bills into our coat pockets every winter." I smiled. That sounds like something I would have done. We talked for a while, about Mary, about my kids when they were small, about the feeling of being forgotten. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer solutions. She just listened. And when she touched my hand before leaving, it was the first warmth I'd felt in a long time that didn't come from a mug. The morning I was discharged, I sat on the bench outside the hospital, waiting for David to pick me up. But it was Samantha who showed. She pulled up in the car, window down, sunglasses on, music playing softly. "You okay to walk?" she asked. I nodded and got in. The drive was silent, aside from the noise of traffic and a podcast she was listening to. Not once did she ask how I was feeling. Not once did she say she was glad I was all right. Back at their house, I stepped inside like a stranger entering someone else's life. My suitcase was already packed and sitting by the door. Samantha must have done it while I was gone. "We thought maybe you'd feel more comfortable staying with Abby for a bit," she said, not looking at me. "You know, since she has more space." I nodded again. I'd stopped fighting. I didn't even ask if Abby knew I was coming. David came downstairs then, phone in hand, eyes flicking toward me like I was a headline he'd already read. "Hey, Dad," he said, tone casual. "Glad you're okay." That was it. No hug. No, I was worried. Just a few empty words tossed across a canyon too wide to cross anymore. I looked at the faces of the children I'd raised, grown now, with polished kitchens and clean shoes and empty hearts. And for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt tired. Deep down to my bones. I carried my suitcase back into the cold. I told them I'd take a cab to Abby's, even though I hadn't heard from her. I just wanted to be anywhere else. The cab ride was quiet. I watched the fields roll by, dead corn stalks swaying in the wind, ghosts of harvests past. That night, alone in a motel room outside the city, I sat in bed with the journal open across my lap. My hand hovered over the page for a long time before I finally wrote. "Collapsed today. No one caught me. Not surprised." Then I closed the book and whispered to the ceiling, "Mary, I don't know how much more of this I have in me." I didn't go to Abby's. After that hospital stay and the way David and Samantha sent me off like a piece of misplaced luggage, I needed space, real space. Somewhere I could breathe without hearing whispers behind doors or seeing pity behind polished smiles. I found a small motel on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. Just a bed, a lamp, and a Bible in the drawer. But it was mine. And for the first time in weeks, I slept without feeling like I was in someone's way. The next morning, I sat at the tiny desk, opened my journal, and let the silence guide my thoughts. There was something about that stillness, it didn't hurt. It held me. Gave me room to remember who I used to be before I became a burden. I read through old entries, pages filled with dates, receipts, sacrifices. Money sent. Favors done. Birthdays remembered even when mine wasn't. I wrote it all down so I wouldn't forget, but reading it now felt like peering into the life of a man who no longer existed. I had been so eager to hold everything together. So desperate to stay useful. And somewhere in that process, I had become invisible. I found a shoebox I'd kept tucked into my suitcase. Inside were Mary's letters, old, creased, full of her neat cursive. Notes she left in my lunchboxes. Birthday cards. Little reminders of love too simple and pure for this world. One note read, "You are the roots of this family tree. Even if the branches grow far, they grow from you." I held that paper like it was her hand. And I cried. Quietly. The way old men do when they've run out of explanations. I hadn't heard from any of the kids. Not David. Not Lila. Not Abby. Not a call. Not a message. I could have been dead for all they knew. Or maybe they knew and just didn't care. That thought kept circling me like a vulture, too cruel to believe, too familiar to ignore. Meals became simpler, instant oatmeal, a banana, water from the tap. I didn't mind. I'd lived on less. But in that solitude, something shifted. The ache didn't fade, but it became clearer. Sharper. Like a wound finally clean. I started writing letters, not to send, just to say what had never been said. One for David, telling him about the time he fell off his bike and I stayed up all night icing his knee and checking for a fever. One for Lila, reminding her how I worked double shifts to pay for her college textbooks so she wouldn't have to take a loan. And one for Abby, sweet Abby, who once painted a picture of me holding the sun. I folded each letter carefully and placed it with the journal. That week, I also did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. Not the kind of prayer where you ask for miracles, but the kind where you sit in silence and let God listen to what your heart can't say out loud. I didn't ask Him to change my children. I didn't ask for money or health or even peace. I asked for the strength to love them, without needing anything back. Because I knew, deep down, that love isn't always a fair exchange. Sometimes you give everything, and the silence is your only answer. I thought about Mary a lot. About how she would have handled all this. She had a way of softening the hard things, of turning pain into purpose. I imagined her beside me, brushing the hair from my forehead, saying, "You did right by them. That's all that matters." And I wanted to believe that was enough. One afternoon, I took out a folder where I'd stored every financial record, bank slips, loan documents, cashier's checks, letters from creditors I paid on their behalf. I organized them, stapled notes to each one, and labeled them by name. Not for revenge. Not even to prove a point. Just so, when I was gone, the truth would still speak. I had been their foundation, even if they never looked down to see what held them up. Some nights, the loneliness still sank deep. The kind of loneliness that turns the walls into mirrors. But even in those moments, I felt something else, too. A strange kind of freedom. Because there was no one left to impress. No one to chase. No one to disappoint. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring anymore. I wasn't hoping for an apology. I was learning how to be okay with the quiet. To sit in it. To let it teach me what noise had hidden all these years. I remembered once, when Abby was 10, she asked me if I ever got lonely after Mom died. I told her no, I had her and her siblings, and that was more than enough. But I think I lied. I think I've always carried a little loneliness inside me. Maybe all fathers do. We just cover it with work and duty and smiles. Now, I wasn't covering anything. I was just being. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I left without saying goodbye. No grand announcement, no dramatic farewell. Just one note, placed neatly on the kitchen counter of David's house, next to a half-used jar of peanut butter. I had gone back one final time, not to ask for anything, not to confront, but to collect what little I had left in that cold guest room. A pair of boots. A worn-out Bible. And Mary's old photograph, which had somehow ended up face down behind a laundry basket. The note simply said, "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. Love, Dad." I knew they wouldn't call. Maybe they'd notice after a few days. Maybe not at all. Either way, I didn't expect them to ask where I went. That kind of curiosity requires a heart still connected to yours. I rented a room from an old friend, Earl Miller. We used to work together at the mill back in the 70s. Earl's place was a little farmhouse on the edge of town. Quiet. Dusty. Perfect. He had chickens, a cranky old radio, and a porch swing that groaned when you sat on it, but Lord, did that swing feel like peace. He gave me the back room. Told me I could stay as long as I wanted. I offered to pay rent, but he waved me off. Said, I'm too old for charity, and too stubborn for roommates. But I reckon I'll make an exception for you, Hank. We settled into a quiet rhythm. Coffee at sunrise, tending to the coop mid-morning, sitting in our rocking chairs by sunset. He didn't ask about my kids. I think he knew better. The silence between old men has its own language. One that doesn't need filling. That first week, I called the banks. Had the automatic payments stopped? The credit cards I'd been paying down for David. The mortgage assistance for Lila. The art studio rental for Abby. I canceled every standing order, closed every quiet pipe of support they never knew existed. The silence that followed was loud. 3 days later, David called. First time in weeks. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Hey, Dad. I got a weird notice from the bank. Something about a payment bouncing? I kept my voice calm. Even. That's because it's not my account anymore. There was a pause. A long one. Then, wait, what? I've stopped covering your debts, David. His voice changed. Less confused, more defensive. I didn't ask you to. You just did it. Why now? Because it's time, I said simply. He didn't reply. Just hung up. 2 days later, Lila left a voicemail. Her voice was tight. Pressed. Dad, I'm getting foreclosure notices. I thought you were still helping with the condo, what happened? I didn't call her back. And Abby, sweet Abby, who once signed her letters with hearts, she sent an email. Not even a phone call. Just lines of text, asking why the art studio rent hadn't cleared. She said she was confused and concerned. I replied with one sentence, it's time you stood on your own, sweetheart. None of them asked where I was staying. None asked if I was okay. The support beams were gone, and their houses began to shake. I didn't take joy in it. I took no pleasure in watching the quiet collapse of the lives I had quietly propped up for so long. But I felt something else, something steadier. Relief. Because now they'd have to see what I was. Not just a tired old man in the corner of their lives. But the reason those lives had held together for as long as they did. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. One morning, while feeding the chickens, Earl looked at me and said, "You seem lighter." "I feel lighter," I told him. And I did. At night, I sat on that groaning porch swing and listened to the crickets. I wrote more letters, added to the journal. Not out of bitterness, but out of love. Real love. The kind that sacrifices even when it goes unnoticed. The kind that lets go when holding on hurts too much. I didn't miss the birthdays they forgot. I didn't miss the forced conversations or the way they looked through me at dinners. I missed who they used to be. I missed who I used to be with them. But I knew I couldn't go back. And I didn't want to. Because for the first time in years, I belonged somewhere. Not in their homes. But in my own skin. If you were in my place, would you have stayed silent, or spoken up? I'd like to know. The truth didn't come out because I wanted it to. It came out because they finally noticed what was missing, not me, but the money. The steady drip of support that had kept their lives glued together. When that stopped, cracks began to show. David was the first to dig. I'd always been careful. I paid things discreetly, never from personal accounts, always through cashier's checks or anonymous bill pay setups. But there were records, and eventually, one slipped through the cracks. A statement from his mortgage company was mailed to his old address, my home. The one still technically in my name. The post office forwarded it to Earl's place, along with a few other bits of mail I hadn't updated. David must have called the bank when he realized something wasn't adding up, and that's when he heard my name. It didn't take much after that. A few calls, a few login attempts, and suddenly the pieces started to fit. My name had been behind years of quiet deposits, loan payments, even Abby's studio lease. He saw it all, maybe for the first time, and something must have clicked. Because one Sunday afternoon, a car pulled up outside Earl's farmhouse. I was sitting on the porch swing, journal in my lap, Earl napping with his hat pulled low. The door creaked, and there was David, standing in the sunlight, looking older than I remembered. Or maybe it was just the guilt weighing him down. "Hey, Dad," he said. I didn't answer right away. Just nodded and gestured to the other chair. He sat down. For a while, we listened to the wind. The silence wasn't awkward. It was honest. "I found out," he finally said. "I figured you would," I replied. His hands rubbed his knees. "You were paying everything. The credit cards, the mortgage, even some of Lila's stuff. Abby's studio lease. All this time. I didn't deny it. I didn't need to. Why didn't you tell us?" I turned and looked at him, not with anger, not with sadness. Just truth. Because it was never about you knowing. It was about you living. He exhaled, looked down. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," I said gently. "Just listen." And for the first time in years, he did. I told him everything. Not to shame him, but to unburden myself. I talked about the sleepless nights, the second jobs, the meals I skipped so they could eat better. The truck I sold. The letters I wrote. The years I spent holding everything together while slowly unraveling inside. He didn't interrupt. Not once. His hands shook. His jaw clenched. I could see it, the full weight of understanding beginning to settle where excuses used to live. When I finished, I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't ask for tears. I just sat back, letting the quiet hold us both. "Lila wants to talk to you," he said after a while. "And Abby." "We didn't know, Dad. We really didn't." I nodded. "I know you didn't. That's part of the problem." He looked at me, eyes red. "Can you come over for dinner? Just, let us say thank you." I stared out at the cornfields. They were turning gold with late summer. Another season coming to an end. "I'll come," I said. "But not for thanks. Just to talk." That Friday, I walked into David's house for the first time in months. Everything looked the same, but the air was different. Quieter. Heavier. Lila was already there, nervously fluffing pillows, and Abby sat at the table, eyes wide like a child waiting for a parent's punishment. They'd planned a dinner, but no one touched the food. Instead, they asked questions. Soft ones. Honest ones. "When did you start doing all this?" Lila asked. "After your mother died," I said. "I wanted to make sure you never felt what I felt when she left." "But why didn't you tell us?" Abby whispered. "Because you were supposed to build your lives, not worry about how I was holding it together behind the scenes." They cried. All three of them. Not dramatically. Not for show. But real tears, the kind that only fall when you finally understand what you've broken. I told them I wasn't angry. "Truth is," I said, "I didn't need your thanks. I just needed your presence. Your kindness. Your time." David covered his face with both hands. Lila reached for Abby's hand. It was the first time in a long time I saw them look like siblings again, not adults wrapped in pride, but children remembering who they were raised by. I gave them copies of the journals. Not to guilt them, but to help them remember. This, I said, placing them on the table, is the story you didn't see. If you care to know it. Then I stood up. I won't stay, I told them. But I'll visit. If the door stays open. And with that, I left. The truth had finally been spoken, not shouted, not demanded. Just quietly revealed. And sometimes, that's all it takes. I didn't expect them to keep calling. After the dinner, after the tears, I figured that was it. A release. A quiet closing of a chapter we had all outgrown. But the next morning, David called. Then Lila. Then Abby. One after another, like children who had finally realized how far they had wandered from home. They didn't ask for anything this time. No favors. No help. Just time. David wanted to bring his youngest to visit me at the farmhouse. Said Tyler kept asking about the chicken place Grandpa lives in now. I laughed, first real laugh in weeks. Lila offered to come fix the steps on the back porch that I'd been meaning to get to. And Abby asked if I'd be willing to look at her latest painting, one she said she couldn't finish until she saw me again. I didn't say yes right away. I let their invitations hang in the air, not to be cruel, but because I needed to feel them mean it. The following weekend, they all came. Together. 3 grown children pulling into the gravel driveway of a humble farmhouse with plastic lawn chairs and chickens pecking at the dirt. They didn't arrive in silence this time. They came with open hands and quiet hearts. No distractions. No phones. David stepped out first. He looked like a boy again, trying to find his place in a world he used to understand. "Hey, Dad," he said, holding up a pie he clearly hadn't baked. Lila followed with a small basket of tools and a determined look in her eyes. Abby came last, canvas in hand, paintbrushes poking out of her back pocket. We sat under the oak tree in the front yard. No porch swings this time, just folding chairs and an old crate I used as a table. Earl stayed inside. He said it was time we had the house to ourselves. I didn't say much. I wanted to see what they brought, not with their hands, but with their hearts. And they tried. They really did. They apologized. Again and again. "I didn't know, Dad." "I should have," David said. "I thought I was busy, but I just wasn't paying attention." Lila's voice cracked when she said, "I thought I was being independent. I thought letting you go was respecting your space." And Abby, she didn't speak for a long time. Just looked at me, eyes rimmed with tears, then handed me her painting. It was of me. Not as I am now, but as I once was, strong, holding all 3 of them in my arms, light in my eyes, laughter in theirs. Below it, in small handwriting, she had written, "He never let us fall." I looked at it for a long time, then gently placed it on the crate. "I believe you're sorry," I said. They all nodded. Eager. Hopeful. But sorry doesn't change the years. Their expressions shifted. Not with anger, just understanding. The slow, hard kind. "You forgot me," I said. "Not all at once. But piece by piece. You forgot who I was when I was no longer needed. And now that you see what I gave, you want to remember. But memory doesn't work like that. It's not a faucet you turn on when it's convenient." Lila wiped her cheek, then whispered, "So what do we do now?" I stood slowly, knees stiff, heart steady. "You build something new. Not because you owe me. But because you want to." I looked at each of them. My children. The same ones I once carried on my back through snowstorms. The ones I sang to when they were sick, cheered for at school plays, prayed for every single night without fail. "I don't need anything from you now," I continued. "Not dinners. Not phone calls out of guilt. I've found peace here. Real peace. What you do from here on, that's your decision. They were quiet again. And I realized, that was the first honest silence we'd shared in years. Later, when they left, I stood by the door, watching the car disappear down the gravel road. They didn't ask me to move back. They didn't promise to do better. And I was grateful for that. Because real change doesn't come from promises. It comes from time. I went inside and opened the journal. Today's entry was simple. They came. They saw. They wept. I forgave. But I do not forget. Because forgiveness isn't a reset button. It's not a clean slate. It's a new page with the old ones still there for anyone who cares to read them. Do you believe people truly change after they've hurt you deeply? Tell me below. The mornings are quieter now, but they don't ache like they used to. I wake with the sun, stretch these old bones, and put the kettle on before the rooster even thinks of crowing. Earl's usually still asleep, but the chickens greet me like I'm someone worth waiting for. Funny, isn't it? You spend a life building legacies in concrete and cash, and in the end, it's the simple rhythms that feel like home. I still write in my journal. Not every day, but when the thoughts get too heavy to carry in silence. These days, the entries are shorter. Softer. Less about pain and more about peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from being understood, but from no longer needing to be. David called last week. Not to ask for anything. Just to say he'd fixed up my old house. Said he's thinking of turning it into a place for veterans or fathers who need a place to land. I told him that sounded right. It made me proud. But I didn't say that. I just said, that's good, son. Because sometimes love means holding back, even when your heart wants to burst. Lila writes letters now. Real ones. Mailed with stamps and signed with her full name, like she's reminding herself who she is. Her last one included a photo of her new nursing certification. She's volunteering at a hospice, she says. I want to be the person who stays, she wrote. I pinned that one to the wall. Abby visited a few days ago, canvas in hand. She brought me a new painting. This time it wasn't of me. It was of a farmhouse, a sky stretched wide with stars, and 2 rocking chairs on a porch. One empty. One filled with a man who looked very much like me. She didn't explain it. She just placed it on the mantel, kissed my forehead, and said, I'm painting with memory now, not regret. They're trying. I see that. I feel it. And though the scars haven't vanished, they've stopped bleeding. That's enough for me. Earl and I sit on the porch most evenings. We talk about the weather, old fishing stories, and sometimes nothing at all. There's a comfort in being beside someone who expects nothing from you but presence. He told me the other night, you've got a stillness about you now, Hank. Like a man who finally put down the hammer after building everyone else's house. I smiled. Because he was right. For the first time in a long, long time. I'm not carrying anyone. And they're learning how to carry themselves. I didn't get the ending I once prayed for, the big family dinners, the grandchildren swarming around my feet, the warm toasts and tearful tributes. But what I got was something else. Something better. I got truth. I got space. I got the final chapter written in my own hand, not dictated by guilt or need or duty, but by choice. Sometimes Tyler comes to visit. He helps feed the chickens, asks me about my old toolbox, or draws shapes in the dirt with a stick. One day he asked, Grandpa, what's the most important thing you ever did? I didn't even have to think. Loved people who forgot how to love me back. He didn't understand it then. But one day, he will. Because being a father isn't about applause. It's about endurance. About planting seeds you may never see bloom. About standing firm when the world forgets your worth, because you never forgot theirs. And now, here at the edge of everything, I see it clearly. They may have called me a burden. They may have turned away. But I never stopped being their father. And in learning to let go of needing their love, I made space for something far more beautiful, self-respect. So if you ask me now, after everything, if I've found peace. Yes. Because they may have lost a father. But I finally found myself.